People who live and work in the London borough of Camden have been sharing their family stories of the First World War. Brian O'Connell reveals his mother-in-law's discovery of a mysterious photograph of a young man and its sad story of young love.
So my mother-in-law was going through personal possessions with her mother and came across a photograph of a young man that she did not know. And on questioning her mother, she found out this was indeed her mother's first husband, who had died in the First World War. And this came as quite a shock to my mother-in-law, because she didn't know her mother had been married twice. She managed to get a photograph of him, and she managed to find out he was around 19 when he died. But like a lot of young men who didn't come back to their wives, that generation of women just got on with it and remarried, and that chapter of their life was then therefore closed, which was sad, but was a reality, I think.
Jean Spriggs remembers her beloved father, injured in the First World War.
My dad was injured in the First World War. Well, the only thing is, as I say, he was in the trenches, and I suppose that everyone else got killed, barring him. But it caused him to be blind and deaf. Well, he used to keep himself to himself, and he used to be walking round and round the table. Because I can remember my mum saying, "For goodness sake, Jack, will you be still?" She said, "You're driving us mad, going round and round the table."
An unusual family heirloom sheds light on the experiences of Peter Wyatt's grandfather during the war.
I brought a medal in today to show you, and it was awarded to my grandfather, Otto Wertheimer, who fought in the First World War. I believe he was an officer, and the only interesting thing that happened to him, apparently, in the First World War was that he fell in the latrine, and that's the only thing that my mum can tell me, really. The medal is actually an Iron Cross. Surprisingly, an Iron Cross is a German medal. Well, he was Jewish, but like a lot of German Jewish people, he fought in the First World War. And then by the time 1938 came along, he had to flee Germany because of what Hitler was doing to the Jewish people then. He had to leave Germany in 1938 at Kristallnacht. My dad was English, so his father, I believe, fought in the First World War. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that the two grandfathers fought each other on different sides in the war, which is quite a fascinating story, really.
Eileen Ward reflects on her father's experiences in the trenches. Like many of his generation, he preferred not to talk about the war.
Well, it was my father, but he never spoke about it. All he said was that he remembers being in the trenches and then being full of water. It didn't alter his character in any way. He always had sort of bladder trouble. He used to blame that on the war for some reason. I don't know whether that was being in the trenches. My dad was very loving, yes. It was a night worker. He always went out at night. And all the kids in the street used to say, "Good night, Mr. Davison." And off he went to work.
Frederick Gisletta remembers his uncle's difficulties on returning to his pre-war job as a wheel tapper, employed to check the safety of train wheels through sound.
Mother had two brothers. They went to war in World War I, but they went on the front line. Henry got killed, but Harry came back. And when he went to work one day, the chap that took over his job noticed that he wasn't putting chalk marks on the wheel of the train. When he hit it with a special hammer, it gave a special tune. If he knew straight away there was a crack, but he never put the chalk marks on, so the chap reported it. So Harry rather lost his job, and he went on the drink after that, and people used to give him money so he could have his drink. And when he came out the pub at night, when they closed, instead of walking, he was running drunk. He just ran back all the way home from the shock that he had seen on the front line. So when his job went, he could do nothing except drink.
David Chilton recalls how his father's quest to find the war grave of his grandfather led to the writing of the musical Oh, What a Lovely War.
I was about 6 years old, and we were driving on a family holiday to Italy, as we'd done a couple of times before. Only this time, my Dad and Mum stopped off at Arras because he was trying to locate his father's grave. He never knew his father, but his father had been killed in the First World War. And his mother had asked him whether he could maybe go and find the grave and take a photograph for her. But when we got to the cemetery, we went round all the graves, but we couldn't find this grave, although we knew he was buried there. And eventually, all we could find was his name on the wall, along with 35,000 others. And that was because there'd been such a terrible catastrophe in the field that most of the bodies couldn't be identified or found. For my father, the effect of not being able to find the grave of his father kind of produced in him a very quiet rage about the whole business of war, and he actually became a pacifist for some time, although he did actually fight in the Second World War as well. But he became a sort of champion of ordinary people who were caught up in the war, and quite critical of both people at home who sent young boys to the conflict and the leaders who got into the mess in the first place. And that was what set my father thinking what happened in this conflict. And he went away and for quite a few years did a lot of research. Eventually he wrote a programme, The Long, Long Trail, that became Oh, What a Lovely War in the Theatre.